There really are many potentially negative outcomes. First of all, workers just don't like it.
Productivity paranoia. More and more employers are monitoring their workers, but is the software too invasive? Next on A Third of Your Life.
You spend a third of your life at work. We're all about making it better. This is the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations podcast.
Big Brother is watching you at work. A growing number of employers are tracking email, mouse clicks, keystrokes, even taking random screenshots and webcam photos to verify that you're working. But what are they doing with the data? And does it really boost productivity? Welcome to A Third of Your Life. My name is Steve Flemish, and my guest is Michael Sturman, professor and chair of the Department of Human Resource Management in the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations. Mike, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me here, Steve.
Mike, what are the legitimate business reasons for monitoring employees and managing their performance and productivity?
Well, businesses obviously have always had an interest in ensuring that their employees are productive. They want to know that they're getting what they pay for. They're paying employees to work. They want to make sure that that work is productive. So there's really strong logic there and a real strong need for companies to ensure that their employees are producing what they're supposed to be producing.
How did employers do this in the old days, before artificial intelligence and before employee monitoring software?
Well, mostly just by watching. By having employees in an office or on a factory floor or whatever it may be, you can watch employees work, and that would show you that they're at least look like they're doing their job and not shirking or doing something else or whatever that might be. For other jobs, people were monitored by their output. So salespeople who are out of the office and can't necessarily be monitored were tracked by, well, how much they sold.
Many blue-collar workers have lived with this for a long time. I'm thinking of warehouse workers, package handlers, drivers, food service, cashiers. I know someone who lost her job at a supermarket because her ring speed was too low. She wasn't scanning enough items every minute. But now it seems white-collar workers are under the microscope too. Bankers, lawyers, even physicians. Why is that? What changed?
Well, in part, what changed is that COVID happened. And there's many more employees now working from home, creating this general fear that people might not be working as hard as perhaps the company wants them to. There's also just the general increasing pressure for greater employee productivity. Whether that's from a doctor or a lawyer or a banker, it's about trying to get more for the same amount of money out of your employees.
Well, it's interesting you should mention the perception of the employer. Microsoft surveyed 20,000 people in 11 countries for its annual Work Trend Index. They wanted to know about the impact of hybrid work. Are we still productive if we're working at home or if we're splitting our time between the office and working from home? The results came out a few weeks ago and they revealed a huge contrast. 87% of workers feel productive at home, but only 12% of managers are confident of that. What do you make of that disparity?
I think a lot of this boils down to managers losing the control that they used to have. This is sort of the same phenomena that everyone thinks they're an above-average driver. You have the situation where people like having control, so the employees who's at home and in control of their situation often feels like they're being more productive. The manager who used to be able to walk around and watch these employees can no longer do that, or at least can't do it as easily. And so there's this fear that, well, maybe the workers aren't doing what they should be doing, and maybe they were only doing that because I was watching.
Well, with so many managers worrying that their employees are not productive, it's probably no surprise that the number of organizations using employee monitoring software has, by some accounts, doubled since the start of the pandemic. The CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, calls it productivity paranoia. Economic analyst Rana Foroohar has an even uglier term, surveillance capitalism. If you Google the term employee monitoring software, you'll see there are numerous companies offering this technology, and some are more invasive than others. So, Mike, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk about some of these software programs and get your take on the kinds of data that they're collecting and whether it really is valuable to managers. I won't name the companies because there are so many of them. It seems unfair to pick out 3 or 4, but I'd like to start with one of the more prominent software programs and get your view on these features and whether they really are helpful to managers.
That sounds good. Go ahead.
All right, so they offer email tracking, surveying messages sent to and from your company account, phone tracking, monitoring phone calls and voicemails, keystroke counters, tracking the number of mouse clicks and keyboard presses, active application monitoring tools showing exactly how employees are spending their time at work, screenshots at regular intervals showing what's on the employee's screen, and finally, webcam photos at regular intervals showing if you're physically at your computer. The company says this is one of the only ways to prevent fraud like outsourcing. They want to make sure that you're really sitting there doing your job. You haven't outsourced your work to someone else. What do you make of all those different features?
Well, most of those features are essentially just different metrics. They're different metrics about how someone is working. The real question is, do those metrics actually relate to how an employee performs? If you measure something, employees will typically do more of it. So if you get paid by sending more emails or sending longer emails, or clicking the mouse more, or typing more, you're going to get people to do those things. But the issue is this really related to what the employee's expected to do or what the employee actually needs to do for their job to be successful in that job? To some extent, these kind of metrics, if it's not well thought out, and sometimes they get adopted because you can measure it, it doesn't mean you should measure it. They may show you that, well, it's kind of a situation where you're making good time, but you don't know where you're going.
Well, the company defended the software in a blog post, and I'll read you the quote from the blog post. Workers can get away with a lot more nowadays, and while most workers are honest, there are some egregious examples of people playing on their phone all day, moonlighting at a second job, and even outsourcing their existing job to someone else while they kick back and relax. Whether we like it or not, it's not realistic for remote workers to expect zero accountability. These same people are quite content to work in full view of others in a bricks-and-mortar workplace for the same reason they feel no fear at airport security. They have nothing to hide. And the same is true for remote workers. Monitoring software only feels scary because it's unfamiliar. The honest majority need not fear the systems that are put in place to prevent abuse from the dishonest few. Far from it, now you have concrete evidence of how hard you're working. That is directly from the company's website. So, Mike, their view is if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. But the other side of that argument is it's still really invasive and potentially misleading. What if you're doing work on paper, not on the computer? The keystroke counter will not capture that. What if you step away from your computer to stare out the window? Maybe you're pondering how to respond to a difficult email. I do that all the time. Obviously, a webcam photo would show an empty chair in that moment. Doesn't mean you're not working. And what if you need to use the bathroom?
I completely agree with your concerns there. There is a lot to unpack in that statement. As a manager or as a business, you should have an idea when you hire an employee that they should be producing something or having certain tasks that you need accomplished. And there should be ways to look at what are the results of those tasks. What is it the person's producing? Are they producing a sufficient quantity or quality of whatever it is that they're supposed to do? And if you can't even describe what that is, so you just want to see if they're sitting in front of a computer, then you have bigger problems than worrying about whether they're playing solitaire.
Let's talk about another one of these companies. This is a different software program now, a company that boasts about 1,000 clients around the world. And on their website, they describe one of their key features this way. Our computer monitoring software allows employees, field contractors, and freelancers to manually clock in when they begin working on an assignment. The application will take screenshots randomly or at set intervals, which allows employers to observe the work process. The application only tracks activity when the employee is clocked in. No spying, only transparency. Mike, here we have the screenshots again. Now, I had a boss about 10 years ago who watched porn at work. I caught him. Several of my coworkers caught him. It was well known throughout the office. That's one area where screenshots would find egregious and inappropriate behavior in the workplace. Are there any other ways, short of an example like that, where a screenshot is useful to managers?
It depends really on the nature of the job. Yes, I could see certain jobs that really are dependent on the person being on their screen and using their screen in certain ways, and spot checking could make some sense. But I'm pretty uncomfortable with this kind of approach, and I think it's a crutch for people who don't know how to actively manage the job appropriately, but are looking for some quick and easy technological solution to help them feel more comfortable with their situation.
Well, it's worth pointing out that even routine, everyday office software has some components that can be viewed as employee monitoring. I mentioned earlier that Microsoft's CEO is criticizing what he calls productivity paranoia, but let's not forget Microsoft Teams has the infamous green and yellow dots. A green dot means you're active, a yellow dot means you're away. And Outlook has a similar feature that displays whether you are free or in a meeting. I will admit, I Googled how to turn that off because I don't want to give the impression that I'm sitting around with nothing to do just because I'm not in a meeting at that moment. But just focusing on the programs that are designed specifically for monitoring, I'm curious, what do employers ultimately do with this information they collect? Do they use it to adjust compensation, decide on promotions? Do they use it to fire people?
It's really going to depend on the employer. But I imagine this kind of information could be used to build a case for dismissing an employee. I would be really hesitant to say, well, you were away from your computer once for a 3-minute period, so therefore you're fired. Although with employment at will, companies could do that if they wanted. But if you're trying to be more proactive about employee performance and you do spot checking on a fairly regular basis, this could help build a case that, we did 30 spot checks during one day and you were not at your computer for 29 of them, and you have a service representative job where you're supposed to be on your computer the whole day. That could be a case where I think more legitimately you could be building a case to influence the person's performance or terminate them from employment or whatever it might be.
But is that effective? I mean, is this good management, or are there better ways to manage performance and productivity?
Better management would involve setting goals for employees and being able to check whether those goals are achieved. It involves looking at sort of broader metrics of how the employee is performing, again, more related to the behaviors and the results associated with the job, and not just the simple things that you can measure because the technology now allows it.
Well, there are varying accounts as to how many companies and organizations are using this kind of software. The management consulting firm Gartner says 30% had some version of this technology before the pandemic, and it's now doubled to 60%. The New York Times reports 8 of the 10 largest private employers in the U.S. now track productivity metrics, many in real time. And I think some of the more interesting stats I've seen come from an IDC survey conducted just about 4 months ago. They asked more than 800 organizations around the world, have you deployed employee monitoring software? These are the results. 48.1% said yes, the software is currently deployed. 21.9% said no, we deployed this software but removed it due to employee pushback. 14.8% said no, we have never deployed this type of software. 14.6% said no, but we removed it for other reasons. And less than 1% said they didn't know. Lastly, among organizations that are using the software, about 2/3 of them are in North America. So all in all, it's a huge number of employers. Are you surprised, or does this sound about right?
Well, actually, I'm a little surprised that so many companies are to some extent admitting that they really don't know how to monitor their employee performance more effectively, that they have to rely on this kind of metrics-driven solutions. But the more I think about it, no, it makes sense that half the companies are concerned. They're worried about how employees are performing. They're not used to this work remote type situation, and they're grasping for solutions to help them sort of feel better about the situation. It also doesn't surprise me, though, that 22% of the companies said they did something and there was such employee pushback that they had to remove it.
Well, the IDC survey also looked at the kinds of data organizations are collecting. Remember, some software is more invasive than others. And here's the tally on that. 38.4% of companies are tracking the software their employees use on their computer. 37.9% are tracking the websites employees visit. 36.4% track the devices being used, 36.1% track logins and logouts, 35.1% track the documents and data accessed by the employee, 33.1% track active and idle time, 32.2% of employers are tracking key logging, 29.8% have technology that reviews emails, messages such as Slack messages, and voicemails. 29.7% have location tracking, and finally 26.3% use screen capture. So if you're someone who's generally against this technology, if you think it's way too big brothery, I guess it's encouraging that only a third of organizations are doing key logging and only about a quarter are taking screenshots, but still, that's a large number of employers globally who are doing this.
That certainly is a large number. And again, I have to wonder how many of these metrics really relate to actual performance on the job. Are they measuring these things because they can, or are they measuring these things because they should? And obviously, this kind of survey doesn't answer that question, but that's the key for this. If it's going to be effective, it has to be metrics that relate to what the employee actually should be doing on a regular basis on that job. And until companies can really be confident about defining what the job should be doing and what needs to be monitored to get effective performance, these kind of metrics do worry me.
The New York Times ran a big story about employee monitoring a few weeks ago, and what jumped out at me is how many different industries are deploying it. Mike, what are the most egregious examples that stood out to you?
Well, there's a number of actually really sort of scary examples out there. One example from that article was about radiologists reading imaging scans, and the software marks them as either active or inactive. Social workers were being assessed based on how much time they're on their keyboard. There was even one really, I think, sad case in Minnesota where productivity points were awarded to hospice chaplains. And these individuals were being essentially disincentivized from visiting people in rural or hard-to-get-to areas. And again, this really shows how the metrics can really hurt the performance you actually want from people on the job.
Yes, what are the risks beside that? I mean, does this contribute to higher stress? What are the other negative outcomes for workers?
There really are many potentially negative outcomes. First of all, workers just don't like it. And so it indeed could contribute to higher stress, and that can cause problems. I also worry about different marginalized groups, individuals who may not have the same access to technology. Maybe you don't live in an area that has broadband at home, and therefore you have less reliable service, which could make it look like you're not working. Individuals with disabilities may have different time that they need to be away from their computer for different reasons. And so you run risks of discriminating against individuals in those kind of conditions. There's really a host of problems that could emerge from this. And again, the purpose is because they're worried about a few people who are egregiously goofing off. And that's always been an issue. And if you're actually monitoring performance and the productivity and what people are producing on their job, then I think you have a better chance of catching that egregious behavior than just random screenshots or counting mouse clicks or keyboard strokes.
Well, the law is generally on the boss's side. The National Labor Relations Board wants to ensure employee monitoring does not infringe on your right to form or join a union, but there is no federal law banning employee monitoring. The Fair Labor Standards Act was enacted decades before this software came into existence. A handful of states, including New York, require private employers to disclose what they're monitoring. The penalties are probably too small to deter large employers, $500 for the first offense, $1,000 for the second, $3,000 for the third. And business groups have fought hard against efforts to curtail employee monitoring in other states. Democrats in California tried to pass a bill that states' employers shall not collect, store, analyze, or interpret worker data unless it's strictly necessary. But the California Chamber of Commerce called it a job killer bill, said it would have imposed overbroad, unworkable mandates on employers, and they helped to defeat it. So, Mike, if employers are not breaking any laws, then what is the risk to organizations? Is it Bad PR, loss of morale, loss of talent?
Well, law has always lagged behind technology. And so there's always some time where the law needs to catch up to what the technology is doing to impose what would be actually appropriate regulation. So in the meanwhile, where there really isn't any kind of regulation, the risk, I think, is largely going to be turnover. Because if you don't treat your employees with respect, there are many opportunities, particularly right now, for them to find other jobs. And given how hard it is for some businesses to find their employees, this could be a substantial risk to their productivity. Also, you may get what you pay for. You may get people who succeed on the metrics you're now measuring, but don't actually perform the jobs that they were doing or the jobs that you really need accomplished. They may stop helping their colleagues out. They may stop doing parts of the job that aren't captured by those metrics. So you may actually be hurting employee performance because you're only measuring certain small aspects of it. There certainly also is the potential bad PR. If someone's getting docked in their pay or fired because of a very legitimate reason that they didn't happen to be in front of their screen, that can really hurt companies' reputations. There's also a lot of social media opportunities for employees to describe where they work. And this really provides an opportunity for them to publicly say, oh, this company's always monitoring me. They're taking screenshots. They yell at me when I'm away from the computer for 4 minutes. This is going to hurt really future recruitment as well. All of this can add up to a lot of loss of talent and a loss of potential talent for the future.
Where do we go from here? Will employers just keep monitoring more and more and more? Will I be microchipped before I turn 50? Or will this peak at some point and come back down to earth? What do you think?
I think the pendulum always goes back and forth. So I think now there's a lot of companies grasping for solutions, and the technology often presents a simple one to begin with. I think that's going to back off a little bit as companies realize that what they're measuring isn't really what they were hoping for from the job, and that employees don't like it, and that's just not working for them. I think there'll always be this kind of technology because so many employees do work from home now, and there is going to be that concern, are they really producing? But I think the best employers, the best companies are going to develop better performance appraisal systems so that they will look at what are the employees doing, are they doing that well, and assessing again what the job should be doing and not just what's the easiest thing to measure.
Michael Sturman, Professor and Chair of the Department of Human Resource Management in the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations. Thank you for being on the show. Keep that mouse moving.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Thanks for listening to A Third of Your Life, the Rutgers School of Management and Labor Relations podcast. For more information on our academic programs, faculty, and research, visit smlr.rutgers.edu.